Well, hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Steven here, Northwest Small Batch Brewing. Let me adjust my mic. Hopefully there's good audio. And today I am filming a brew day. This question came up because I am or have done a brew recently. That is a decoction mash. And you don't have to do a decoction mash these days. You can buy malt that sort of mimics it, and it really was meant back for the days when there was a couple of reasons for doing it. Essentially, I don't know if you can hear, there's motorcycles driving by, so hopefully it's not too loud, but sorry, it distracted me for a second. Essentially, decoction mash, the main reason is to get the Maillard reaction. So you're taking some of your wort and mash, both, putting it into a pot on the stove, boiling it or close to boiling it for a period of time, letting it sort of evaporate down, and then returning it to your pot, giving you more of the, malty flavors that you get from doing that. It's also was a way to help keep the wort or your mash at the right temperature. Back then, it wasn't so easy to heat such huge amounts of liquid, so you would take part of it out so that you could boil it and get it really hot, and then return it to the pot and get the temperature to come back up. Anyway, cheers, by the way. This is a smoked Grodziskie, and from Great Notion, a great brewery. Grodziskie is a smoked beer, usually low, very, very low ABV. This one's like 3.2. And it's a, what do you call it? Like a, basically when it was completely extinct, wasn't made for a while. And it's a Polish beer, and it's been being brought back to life by craft breweries. And that makes me happy. Anyways, the core question when we're talking about decoction mashing is, wouldn't you lose efficiency or miss your original gravity if you're boiling part of your mash and then, returning it through, basically you're denaturing your enzymes, right? Do you know what I mean by denaturing? So if you boil some of the mash, you're going to kill the enzymes that are in the grain, and then that's not going to be available anymore for converting sugar into alcohol. So you would think that your gravity, your original gravity, will end up being off at the end because you have taken a portion of that out and killed it. Well, the short answer, before I get to the long answer, is no. The answer is no. It doesn't really do that. So if done correctly, you don't really lose efficiency when you do a decoction mash. In fact, you can sometimes increase your extraction efficiency when you do a decoction mash. Huh? Okay, so let's get into that, and hopefully we'll keep this video within reason. So why don't you lose efficiency with a decoction mash? I got at least 4 reasons for you. Number 1, most of the enzymes stay in the main mash. So when you pull decoction, you're basically pulling the mash, which is grain heavy. You're not just pulling liquid. You're not just reducing the wort afterwards. You're actually taking the grain and the mash, and in fact, you want mostly grain in this thing when you do it. The liquid portion that's left behind, right, in the pot, still contains all your enzymes that are active. And those enzymes continue converting starches. So when you return your decoction mash after you boiled it down back to the pot, you still have all these enzymes that are working in your pot that are still going to attack what you add back and break it down. Right? So in a sense, you may be actually increasing efficiency. All right, number 2. Number 2 reason why you don't really lose efficiency when you're doing a decoction mash. The conversion mostly happens before you do your boil. So the proper technique, and I use that term loosely, proper, is to pull the decoction, the amount that you're going to boil, after your conversion has started. So don't just throw in the grain and then immediately take out a portion to boil. You want to basically do a rest, which you call we used to call it a protein rest or a beta amylase rest. And then you want to pull what you're going to use to do your decoction mash. The grains in the decoction mash are already converted, right? Because you've done this rest, they've already converted at least a portion, right, of their sugars. They're partially degraded starches at that point because you've let them rest in your pot for a period of time. So you're not relying on enzymes that are inside that decoction that you've pulled out. When you, like I said, when you return it back to the pot, your pot is full of those enzymes and can still break down everything you're returning back to the pot. So how does boiling, and I say boiling, you don't necessarily need to boil in a decoction. In fact, you probably shouldn't. You're risking scorching if you do that. But for lack of a better word, let's just say, how does heating up or boiling improve your extraction? Like, how is that? You know, I kind of explained it, but let's go a little bit further here, right? So boiling your grain does a couple of useful things. Number one, it breaks down the cell walls. So sometimes you mill your grain, but you're still, some of it may have slipped through or not gotten milled properly enough to actually access the starch inside the grain. And so in a normal, you know, situation where you're just doing a normal mash, you may not get anything from that particular grain that never actually, you know, cracked open or whatever. However, when you're boiling it and you take it out, it actually will soften and break down those cell walls, and that will gelatinize some of that starch and enhance the sugar release, hence getting actually better efficiency by doing the decoction. So in other words, when you return that decoction back to the mash, it can extract even more efficiently than it did before because you've broken down the cell walls even more to that grain that's in there. All right. I don't know if this is really a reason as to not losing efficiency, but the flavor impact is really your biggest impact when you do a decoction mash. The reason, like I said, the real reason for doing that decoction mash is a Maillard reaction, right? When Maillard is a cooking term, essentially, it's like when you heat something up, it changes the chemical composition and you get a different flavor. And in this case, it's going to make it like more toasty, like toasted bread, more malty, richer. And of course, you get more of that melanoidin character, which is, by the way, a good segue to say that a lot of people use melanoidin malt to replace the decoction when you're doing a beer that you want to do or want to get a decoction flavor from, but you don't want to do a decoction. Sometimes you add that malt, and that adds that. Does it really do it as good? I think you're probably going to have a hard time telling the difference, but most people do a decoction for historical reasons because they just want to try it. It's something that used to be done, and they want to, you know, give it a shot. So, like I said, I'll be doing it, but it's not something I would do on a regular basis. It's just something interesting to try. So, the question then begs, when can you lose efficiency when you're doing a decoction mash? So is it possible to do a decoction mash and then end up having a lower original gravity that's a result of that? All right, well, the answer is yes, right? There's a couple of things, if you don't do it correctly, it can actually hurt your efficiency, right? So if you pull too early, I mentioned this earlier, that you have to wait for the starch conversion to begin in your mash. You don't just mash in and immediately take out a portion and then start decocting that portion. You need to give you need to rest. And I'm going to go over a really specific way to do it, but you need to give a rest so that you can get some of the enzymes and stuff into your mash before you pull anything out, right? Pulling too thin is another reason why you can lose efficiency. I also mentioned this, but to be very specific, if you mostly take liquid out of your mash, you're basically just removing enzymes from the mash and killing the enzymes. and that's going to cause you to lose efficiency. You always want to pull as thick a mash as possible. So you want mostly grain. Try not to get a ton of liquid. I mean, you need some, but don't make it like a wort, right? You want a lot of good thick mash in it. Overshooting your temperature, right? If you are returning your decoction, and that decoction, because it's hot, causes your mash to overheat, go beyond, right, what you were trying to do, it will potentially kill the enzymes, or some of them that are in your wort, and then you'll have less efficiency. So, how much do you pull? How much, decoction do you pull out of your pot? Well, I'm going to give you 2 examples. One for the people that do these 5-gallon batches, and one for the size that I do, which is like 3-gallon. So for the 5-gallon, I'm going to call it 5.5 because most people do 5.5 so that you have a half gallon of throwaway, basically proteins and debris and stuff that you're not going to keep anyway, and left. You're not gonna save some at the bottom that's got the yeast cake. So we do 5.5 gallons. So typically your decoction size is going to be 30 to 40% of your mash. That's for a single decoction. If you're doing double decoction, you're going to do more like 20 to 30% each pull. So that's pretty significant. 30 to 40% is quite a bit, right? And of course, in my opinion, it also depends on how much room do you have on the stove, on the pot on your stove, You can only fit so much, and you can only heat up so much. All right. So for a 3-gallon batch, which I would say 3.5 gallon to account for that other stuff, again, we can scale this down. So a single decoction, somewhere between 25 and 30% of your mash. The exact amount you pull depends on your starting mash temperature, your target temperature, and the thickness of your mash. Okay, when do you pull the decoction? Now we know how much, basically. Now, and I'm going to give you even more specific numbers. How do you know when to pull? Well, generally speaking, here's how it works. You mash in, right? And you do a protein rest, what's called a low protein rest. That's optional, but I think it's a smart thing to do. You let the conversion begin, right? You let your enzymes start to convert. Then you pull your decoction with lots of grain, and then you heat it up to whatever temperature. You could say boiling, but I just don't think you need to necessarily fully boil it. But let's say simmer it. Simmer it for up to 30 minutes, and then you put it, you return it back in the next step to your mash. It sounds more difficult than it is, I promise. So, best practices here when it comes to decoction. You want to pull a thick mash. I can't stress that enough. Thick mash, grain heavy. So you don't want to use mostly liquid. Grain heavy mash. You stir it occasionally during the boil because you don't want it to scorch. I suggest doing a simmer and constantly stirring. You have no idea how quickly that can scorch. Don't stop stirring it while you're doing this, in my opinion. You have to do a rest decoction, right? Or a protein rest. So 5 to 10 minutes before you boil your decoction, you're doing what's called a saccharification rest. Okay, that's an old-time term. You should go look that one up. Then you're going to next, best practice is to let it boil for anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, depending on your flavor goals. And then you want to slowly return it and stir while you return it to your mash. Watch the temperature of your mash. Try not to go over, right? Your temperature. So don't just dump that entire, heated and stuff mash back in. Do it slowly. Use a ladle or something. Slowly add it back so that you're not causing your mash to overheat. So, again, does decoction improve your original gravity? Well, as I've kind of proven through this video, it can. A lot of brewers report that they get either the same, original gravity or even better efficiency when they do a decoction mash, especially if you're using under-modified malt, which isn't really relevant today because today's malt is really heavily modified, so that should not be an issue. And again, it's another reason why a lot of people just don't even bother doing decoction. But it is something interesting and maybe worth trying to see if it does affect the flavor of your beer and give you a really good beer. I plan to do it Like I said, if I don't know when this video is going to post. My guess is it's going to post before my next beer. So this will be something I do on an upcoming beer that you'll see. Bottom line is that you don't lose your gravity or efficiency when you're doing a decoction if you do it properly. The enzymes in your main mash are still converting, and that's why you don't lose any efficiency. The boiling helps with extraction because, as I said, it softens and gelatinizes the husk in the malt, and it adds flavor. So you actually can increase your efficiency. So the main risk, right? The main risks and process mistakes are process mistakes, not the technique itself. So the technique is good, but if you don't do it correctly, there's a few, like I said, points where you really have to make sure you're not adding the decoction back to your mash too quickly. You got to make sure that when you pull the decoction, it includes a lot of grain. And you have to make sure you don't pull the decoction too soon. You need to get the conversion on your mash before you pull the grain. Anyway, I think that's good enough for now. I will leave you with those parting thoughts. And if you are looking to do or learn more about decoction mash, check out the Apartment Brewer on YouTube. He has many videos where he has done decoction mashing and takes you through the whole process and records the whole thing. So that's a good resource for decoction. I'll be back in another week for another beer. Might be a full beer video if I can get my act together and get it edited for you. Otherwise, it might be a brew talk. I am going to be going to HomebrewCon, so I'm foggy on the dates here and when this is going to post. But at any rate, I may have a week where I don't have a video, which has not happened maybe ever, or at least not for a very long time. But I just am not gonna I might post some short videos or something while I'm out there at HomebrewCon, but I don't really do vlogging, so we'll see how that goes. At any rate, if you notice that I'm off for a week, I'm taking a break. All right, I'll see you soon, and until then, keep on brewing. Cheers.